When working with asynchronous code, the error handling can be a bit different. With promises, we generally use the catch method to handle errors. However, using async await causes our code to look synchronous, and therefore we use the traditional try-catch statement with async and await. There are a few things to be aware of when handling errors with asynchronous code. So let's take a look at that. Now, the first asynchronous pattern that I want to look at is promises. So here's what I have set up. I have an async test function here that is creating and returning a promise. It's set up to receive both the resolve and the reject functions. And notice that we're able to pass a Boolean into this function. If we pass true, it resolves. If we pass false, it rejects. That's great setup for allowing us to test different scenarios with promise-based code. Now also we have a line in here, and it's simply retrieving some data from this object. This data right here, 32345. Uses the getData method to do that. The reason I threw that in here is this is a way to illustrate something we may have in our code that is retrieving data. And it's possible that there may be something wrong at some point, and we get an error because we're not able to retrieve that data. So that will allow us to simulate that. All right, so that's what I have set up here. So let's first go ahead and call the async test function. And I'm going to pass in true to begin with. We'll just see, make sure it's working. I'm going to set up a then method because we want to handle that. And I'm going to pass in a function for resolve. Here's the function. I'm going to use arrow function just to make it simple. And all we're going to do is just log to the console that it's been resolved. And in addition to that text, whatever is returned when it's resolved, we'll log that as well. So there we go. And let me go ahead and save that. We're going to take a look at this. Let me resize this here so we can look at this easier. And take a look at the console, and we can see that that is resolved. Now, what happens if we go ahead and reject this? If we cause it to reject, remember I can pass in false, and it will reject. Notice we do not handle that. The rejection is not handled at all. Uncaught in promise failure. This is what is returned from the rejection. Right here we see that. So there are a couple ways to handle errors in promises. One is by passing in a reject function right here. We can pass in that function to handle any rejections. The other is the catch method. Let's first take a look at why we can't use the try catch. So for example, if I were to put try and then embed this inside of try catch, inside the try there, and then we have catch down here, and we simply want to catch the error, and then console.warn. We'll just display the warning there. Now right now we are rejecting, so let's see if we can handle that. It doesn't handle it. It gets the same thing. Now also we can simulate an error besides a rejection. We can comment out this object here. So now this is not going to be found. This OBJ is not going to be found. It's caused a reference error. I'm going to simulate that possibility. Will try catch handle that? No, we get a different error. We get the reference error, but try catch does not handle it. And the reason for this is twofold. One, a rejection, when we're dealing with rejection, that's really a part of the promise. And try catch is not going to see that. But when we're dealing with asynchronous code, probably the better reason to explain this is that this try catch has completed. It's done. That code is finished even before the asynchronous code comes back with its results. And so we're not able to pick things up. So we need to use one of the two methods that I mentioned before. We need to use a reject function that we pass in, or we need to use the catch method. Let's first look at passing in a second function here. So if I put a comma And here's what we're going to pass in. I'm going to grab what is returned in the message variable, and then console.warn, and I'll just indicate that it's rejected. And then also display, whoops, comma, that, like that. Okay, so there we go. We have a second function being passed in now that will be the reject function. So now the object is still commented out. Now if we save it, we can see that we get a console.warn. We are handling that properly. Now also, we go ahead and make the object available and just reject the promise. It is handling that as well. So the reject method, or the reject function that we pass in, takes care of that and handles that. Now, I said there were two ways. The second way is, of course, the catch method. So what I'm going to do is, let me just comment this out here. Come down here, and we're going to use this again, but I'm going to remove our second method we added here. And now we're going to just do catch. So we do a catch at the bottom here. And once again, got to pass in the function. I'm going to use simple arrow function again. We'll just do console.warn, and I'm just going to warn with the message. That's what we're going to do. All right, so now with rejection, we catch it. Failure is but what is being returned here. But also, if we have an error, we'll comment that out. We get the reference error, and we capture that as well with the catch method. So that is the way to deal with error handling in promises. Now, another pattern for dealing with asynchronous code is the async await function. And async await allows us to deal with asynchronous code in a synchronous manner. So this means we can use the traditional try-catch code for handling errors. Many times this can be the preferred method for dealing with the errors. So what I'm going to do here, let me go ahead and comment out this one. And I'm going to copy in an async function, and we'll take a look at how this one is handling it. All right, so here's our async function. Now notice that I'm invoking the function right away. It's an immediately invoked function. I've got the parentheses around the outside of it, and then I do the two parentheses to invoke it. And that's just so I don't have to do another line here and call it. This will allow us to see the async function working for us. But this is set up as an async function. We have the async keyword before the function keyword, the name of the function, data. Then we call async test. The first one is with true, and so it's a success, but we await the results. We place it in a variable and then log that to the console. So if we save that, we get an error because I did not uncomment the object up here, and so we're getting an error even though it is set up to be successful. When it is successful, we get the success message down here at the bottom. Now we saw that error, so how would we deal with that? Let's go ahead and create it again. We deal with it using a traditional try-catch. So if I do a try, and let me go ahead and put all of this up inside the try block, like that. Whoops. And then we have our catch block. And inside the catch block, we're just going to do another console.warn. And we'll log out the error there. So here is our try catch. We still have this commented out, so we should get an error. I save that. Sure enough, we handle the error. Console.warn handles the error. If we change this to false so that it rejects, make sure that the object's okay, we handle that as well. So async function, we use try and catch. That's what we can traditionally do. And many times that is the preferred method. Now, many times asynchronous code that we're writing is dealing with the use of the fetch API. Now, error handling with fetch has some unique differences that I want to address before moving on. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to comment out this, and I'm just going to copy in a function and a call to that function. So here we go. Retrieve to do. This uses fetch, and it's using the JSON placeholder site, which is a way to test fetch and try different things. Basically, it's going to retrieve a to-do, and there's a certain number of to-dos on this site. 5,000, which is what I'm passing in to retrieve. That's above what this can return. So this is going to cause an HTTP error. Now notice I have a catch method. Is it going to grab that HTTP error and do a console.warn for it? Let's go ahead and see what happens. I save that. And we get the HTTP error here, but we're not getting console.warn. In fact, notice what we are getting. We're getting the console log message here and the response. Here's the response that we received back. We're getting that. And then it's returning the JSON version of that. And then right here, we're console logging that as well. And here it is right here. It's empty because nothing was returned because we got an HTTP error. And so this is not handling the HTTP error. Now, why is that? Why is it not handling it? Well, let's jump to the MDN site really quick on fetch. And notice this first bullet here. The promise returned from fetch won't reject on HTTP error statuses, even if the response is an HTTP 404 or 500. So it's not going to reject in those cases. Instead, as soon as the server responds with headers, the promise will resolve normally. Then notice what it says here. With the OK property of the response set to false. That gets set to false. This OK property gets set to false. And so we can make use of that. Let's jump back and take a look at right here. OK. Here is our response, and the OK property is set to false. So that will be set to false if it's not successful. So can we make use of that? Yeah, we can. And here's a pattern I like to use in doing that. I'm going to go ahead and copy in what I'm calling a check fetch function. Now what is this going to do? This allows us to pass in a response, and it's going to check to see if OK is set to false. If it is set to false, notice what we're doing here. We are throwing an error. We're throwing an error, and by throwing an error, it will cause this catch method to grab it, and we can handle that error instead of not being able to handle it. It will also prevent it from trying to do this when nothing was returned anyway. So this is going to help us to respond to that correctly. Now, the way we do this is following the fetch statement, we have to have another .then method, and remember with .then we pass in a function. Well, the function we're going to pass in is check fetch. We want that one to fire first. If an error is thrown, it will jump down to catch. If there is no error, if the response is OK, then it's going to return the response, and it will do the normal things with it. All right. So let's go ahead and try that, save that, and see what happens. We get our normal HTTP error, but notice we're handling it correctly now. We get a console.warn. We're handling that. It contains the information that was sent back. So now we're handling it. It's not trying to do this because it can't really do that. We didn't get back what we were supposed to, and so that was successful for us. So that is a pattern for handling fetch, handling errors within fetch, HTTP errors. Now, if you prefer an async version, let me go ahead and copy that in just so you can take a look at it. It'll be here in the code. Notice how we're doing it. We set up an async function, and then we await the fetch. We await what is returned, and then we pass that into check fetch, and we await that. And if an error is thrown, it will jump down here to the catch block right here. If not, it will continue with the rest of this code and take care of it. So that's an async version of it, or a promise version. We can do both to handle errors properly with fetch. Okay, now we still need to look at another type of asynchronous code, and that is asynchronous code that happens with event listeners. And what do we do when errors occur with those? That's what we're going to be looking at next.